The German pilots had learned to read the sky like a clock. Every formation had its rhythm, every escort its range limit. At 26,000 feet above the frozen Reich, the mathematics of survival were simple. Wait for the American fighters to turn back, then strike. January 1944. The W-190 seconds climbed through winter clouds, their pilots calculating fuel reserves and attack vectors. Below, a stream of B-17 seconds droned eastward. 109 heavy bombers, 1200 men, heading deep into Germany's industrial heartland. Then came the silver fighters, long-nosed, unfamiliar silhouettes. The escorts should have turned back by now. They always turned back, but these didn't. They pressed on through the flak belt, past the old boundaries all the way to Berlin itself. In that moment, Luftwaffe Major Gunther Rahl would later recall his voice, carrying the weight of inevitability. We understood the war in the air had fundamentally changed. This is the story of the P-51 Mustang. The day range became weapon. The day the mathematics of air war were rewritten. The Allied daylight bombing campaign rested on a doctrine forged in pre-war optimism. Precision strikes by massed formations could dismantle the Nazi war machine without the indiscriminate carnage of nighttime area bombing. The Norden bomb sight, that marvel of mechanical computation, with its gyroscopes and optical systems, promised accuracy from 2,000 feet. The self-defending bomber formation, flying fortresses bristling with 50 caliber weapons, would theoretically create interlocking fields of fire that no fighter could penetrate. Theory met reality over the burning factories of the Ruhr Valley and the ball-bearing plants of Schweinfurt. By autumn 1943, the arithmetic of attrition had become brutally clear. The 8th Air Force was hemorrhaging aircraft at rates that exceeded replacement capacity. On October 14, Black Thursday, 291 bombers launched toward Schweinfurt. 60 never returned. 17 more were damaged beyond repair. 600 men were killed, wounded, or captured in a single afternoon. The Luftwaffe had perfected a deadly calculus. German radar stations, Freya and Würzburg arrays stretching from Norway to France, tracked bomber formations from takeoff. Fighter control centers coordinated intercepts with mechanical precision. And always, the Jagdgeschwader pilots knew the magic number, the range limit of Allied escorts. The P-47 Thunderbolt, powered by its massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 radial engine, producing 2,000 horsepower, could reach perhaps 450 kilometers from English bases with external tanks. The graceful Spitfire, optimized for the short-range defensive battles of 1,940, managed even less. Beyond those invisible boundaries somewhere over Belgium or the Netherlands, the bombers flew alone into what crews grimly called the meat grinder. From September 1943 through February 1944, operational losses averaged 6.4% per mission. Basic probability made the numbers inescapable. A crew facing a 25-mission tour had roughly one chance in 3 of surviving. Some units suffered worse. The 100th Bomb Group earned its nickname, the Bloody 100th, through casual statistics. Berlin remained untouchable by daylight. The question, haunting every Allied air commander, was not strategic but existential. Could you win an air war when your bombers couldn't reach the enemy's capital and survive? The answer was being assembled in California, not through tactical brilliance or operational daring, but through aerodynamic engineering and the precise marriage of British powerplant technology with American industrial methodology. Dawn, over East Anglia. The sound begins before light, a deep mechanical thunder that rattles windowpanes in villages miles from the airfields. At Thorpe Abbots at Bassingbourn at Kimbolton, hundreds of Wright R1000, 820 Cyclone engines cough to life in the darkness. Ground crews swarm beneath aluminum wings, loading bomb bays with 500-pounders, checking oxygen systems, arming defensive guns. Inside the briefing huts, cigarette smoke hangs thick as fog. The curtain pulls back from the wall map and reveals the red yarn stretching deep into Germany. Sometimes the groans are audible. Regensburg, Schweinfurt, Merseburg. The names become synonyms for fire and falling. By 0800 hours, the formations assemble combat boxes of 18 aircraft stacked in altitude and spacing, to create overlapping fields of defensive fire. The theory looks elegant on paper, interlocking 50 caliber machine guns creating zones of destruction that no fighter could penetrate. The reality at 25000 feet with frost forming on gun barrels and oxygen masks proves far messier. The crossing begins over Lowestoft over the cold grey North Sea. The bomber stream stretches 30 miles long. P-47 Thunderbolts rise to meet them, big powerful aircraft with their distinctive bubble canopies and 8 machine guns. For a while, the sky feels crowded with protection. For a while, somewhere over the Dutch coast, the mathematics become visible. The Thunderbolts waggle their wings, the signal every bomber crew dreads. Fuel state critical. The escorts peel away heading west, and the formations continue east into suddenly empty sky. The German radar stations have been tracking them since takeoff. Freya arrays along the coast, feeding coordinates to JAG Division headquarters where controllers plot vectors and scramble fighters. The Luftwaffe rises in stages, first the coastal units, then the deep defense rings around industrial targets. BF 109 seconds from JG-26, 4 190 seconds from JG-1. Twin-engine BF 110 seconds carrying rocket tubes beneath their wings. They know precisely where the escorts end. They've studied the patterns for months, calculated fuel consumption rates, mapped the invisible wall in the sky where American protection evaporates. They simply wait on the far side of that wall. The attacks come from 12 o'clock high, diving out of the sun with cannons firing, then from 6 o'clock low. From 3 o'clock level, the air fills with tracer rounds, painting geometric patterns across blue sky, with the black bursts of 88mm flak, creating deadly gardens of shrapnel with the staccato hammer of machine guns and the deeper thump of cannon fire. Inside a B-17 ball turret, a 19-year-old from Kansas rotates his position, trying to track an FW-190 screaming past at 400 miles per hour closure rate. The turret is a plexiglass sphere hanging beneath the bomber's belly, offering perfect visibility and absolute vulnerability. He can see everything: the German fighter's propeller spinner, the yellow paint on its nose, the muzzle flashes from its wing-mounted MG-151 cannons. A bomber takes hits in its number 3 engine. Fire blooms orange against aluminum skin. The formation tightens, closing the gap automatically, maintaining the combat box even as one of their own begins the long spiral down through 2,000 feet of freezing air. In 1943, the 8th Air Force lost 1623 heavy bombers. Not damaged, lost. Each one carried 10 men, 16,000 young men who learned to read fate in fuel gauges and escort range limitations. The veteran crews developed gallows humor and private mathematics. You calculated your odds on the wall beside your bunk, 25 missions for a completed tour, 6% loss rate per mission. The probability curve bent sharply downward somewhere around mission 15. We knew what happened when the little friends turned back. One tail gunner would recall decades later, his voice still carrying the weight of those bomber streams pushing east. The sky stopped being neutral. It became predatory. The fighter escort problem represented a brutal equation in thermodynamics and aerodynamic efficiency. Every additional mile of range demanded compromises that rippled through the entire aircraft design. Structural weight, fuel capacity, engine performance, and combat capability formed an interconnected system where improving one parameter inevitably degraded others. Consider the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. At 1,450 pounds fully loaded, it was the heaviest single-engine fighter of its era. The Pratt & Whitney R-2800 Double Wasp, 18 cylinders, arranged in 2 radial rows, consumed fuel at approximately 170 gallons per hour at cruise settings. With internal fuel capacity of 305 gallons, basic mathematics yielded roughly 1.8 hours of flight time. Factor in takeoff climb to altitude combat reserves and landing margins, and the operational radius collapsed to approximately 230 miles. Engineers attempted technological workarounds. External drop tanks, teardrop-shaped aluminum containers slung beneath wings or fuselage could extend range, but at severe cost. A 108-gallon belly tank added 650 pounds of drag-inducing weight and reduced maximum speed by 35 miles per hour. The tanks themselves were temperamental, prone to feeding problems at altitude, vulnerable to combat damage, and operationally complex to jettison under high-G maneuvering. The British Supermarine Spitfire embodied different compromises. Designed for defensive interception during the Battle of Britain, it carried just 85 gallons internally, sufficient for approximately 40 minutes of combat operations over southern England. Attempts to extend range through external tanks and fuselage modifications yielded marginal improvements. Even the long-range Spitfire IX variants struggled to reach 400 miles operational radius. By late 1943, the 8th Air Force had developed elaborate escort relay systems. P-47 seconds would meet bombers over the Channel, escort them to the German border, then hand off to fresh P-47 groups flying from forward bases. The logistics were staggering, coordinating rendezvous points in three-dimensional space, accounting for weather deviations, managing fuel states across multiple squadrons. On the 11th of January 1944, a mission to Oschersleben required 3 separate escort waves, totaling 638 fighters, and still the bombers flew unescorted for 90 critical minutes over Germany. The engineering community understood the fundamental challenge: specific fuel consumption. The pounds of fuel burned per horsepower per hour dictated everything. The R2000 800 radial engine, while powerful and reliable, operated at approximately 0.5 pounds per horsepower per hour at cruise settings. Improving that figure even marginally would yield exponential range benefits. Allied planners ran calculations that bordered on desperation. Could bombers fly at night like the RAF, sacrificing accuracy for protection? Could escort fighters land in Russia, refuel and escort bombers home, requiring Stalin's cooperation and massive forward logistics? Could you design a specialized long-range escort, accepting reduced combat performance in exchange for endurance? Each option carried cascading complications. Night bombing abandoned the entire precision doctrine that justified daylight operations. Soviet cooperation was politically unreliable. A fighter optimized solely for range would be slaughtered by Bf 109 seconds and Fo 190 seconds optimized for combat performance. The psychological toll manifested in planning rooms and briefing huts. Bomber crews developed private languages for the unescorted portions of missions Indian country beyond the little friend's naked time. Fighter pilots experienced their own frustration, the helpless rage of watching bomber formations continue eastward while fuel gauges dictated westward turns. In October 1943, General Henry Hap Arnold, commanding the Army Air Forces, convened a conference at the Air Ministry in London. The central question was existential. Could strategic bombing continue without prohibitive losses? The statistics were presented in clinical language: attrition rates, replacement capacity, crew morale indicators, but everyone in that room understood the human translation. Young men were dying because engineering hadn't solved range. What they needed was not incremental improvement, but fundamental reimagining. Not a better fuel tank, but a different aircraft. Not more escorts, but smarter design. And in California, that design already existed, awaiting the correct engine. In April 1940, the British Purchasing Commission approached North American Aviation with a request that bordered on the impossible design prototype and prepare for production. An entirely new fighter aircraft within 120 days. The context was existential. Britain stood alone against Nazi Germany, its aircraft production struggling to replace losses from the Continental Campaign and the emerging Battle of Britain. North American Aviation's chief designer Edgar Schmude possessed a critical advantage: systematic analysis of existing fighter designs from multiple nations. He had studied the aerodynamic characteristics of the Bf 109, the structural innovations of the Spitfire, the production methodologies of Soviet designs. What emerged was not imitation but synthesis, a design that integrated the most effective elements into a coherent aerodynamic and structural framework. The breakthrough centered on laminar-flow wing theory. Traditional wing designs generated turbulent airflow across their surfaces, creating parasitic drag that consumed engine power and limited efficiency. Laminar flow, where air molecules move in smooth parallel layers rather than turbulent eddies, offered dramatic reductions in drag coefficients. The technical challenge was translating theory into manufacturable reality. Schmude's team designed a wing profile with maximum thickness positioned at 45% of chord length rather than the conventional 25–30%. This seemingly minor adjustment, combined with exceptionally smooth surface finishing tolerances of 0.0005 inches, maintained laminar flow across approximately 60% of the wing surface at cruise conditions. The aerodynamic implications were quantifiable. Conventional fighters of the era exhibited drag coefficients around 0.027 inches clean configuration. The P-51's laminar flow wing achieved 0.0163, a 40% reduction. Translated to operational performance, this meant that for identical engine power, the Mustang consumed approximately 35% less fuel at cruise settings than aerodynamically conventional designs. The initial prototypes flew with Allison V1710 engines, 12-cylinder liquid-cooled power plants producing 1150 horsepower at sea level. Performance below 15,000 feet impressed test pilots. The aircraft achieved 382 miles per hour at optimal altitude and demonstrated exceptional handling characteristics. But above 15,000 feet, where bomber escort combat occurred, the single-stage supercharger limited power output dramatically. At 25,000 feet, effective horsepower degraded to approximately 780, insufficient for engaging BF-109G variants, producing 1475 horsepower at similar altitudes. The British Air Ministry, operating 5 Mustang I squadrons in the tactical reconnaissance role by mid-1942, recognized the airframe's potential, constrained by power plant limitations. Rolls-Royce test pilot Ronald Harker flew a borrowed Mustang in April 1942 and immediately perceived the solution: marry the superior American airframe to the Merlin 61 engine, featuring a 2-stage 2-speed supercharger that maintained power output to 30,000 feet. The transformation proved revolutionary. The Packard-built Merlin V16507, producing 1720 horsepower, with 67 inches of manifold pressure at war, emergency power elevated the Mustang's performance into an entirely different operational category. At 25,000 feet, the altitude where bomber escort combat occurred, the P-51B generated maximum speed of 440 miles per hour. Rate of climb improved from 2300 feet per minute to 3475 feet per minute. Service ceiling extended from 31350 feet to 41900 feet. But the decisive metric was specific range, nautical miles traveled per pound of fuel consumed. The Merlin-powered Mustang achieved approximately 2.2 nautical miles per pound at optimal cruise settings of 265 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. Compare this to the P-47D's 1.4 nautical miles per pound, and the strategic implications become inescapable. With internal fuel capacity of 184 gallons plus 2 75-gallon drop tanks, the P-51B could maintain escort duties at combat radius of 650 miles, sufficient to reach Berlin from English bases and return with 30 minutes of combat reserves. The mathematics had fundamentally changed. Range was no longer a constraint, but a weapon. The sky's invisible boundaries had been erased through aerodynamic efficiency and power plant integration. The operational integration of the P-51B into 8th Air Force Escort Doctrine represented not merely equipment replacement but systematic doctrinal transformation. The first Mustang groups, the 354th Fighter Group, operating initially under 9th Air Force Tactical Command, arrived at Boxted Airfield in November 1943. Initial deployment encountered the predictable friction of introducing revolutionary capability into established operational frameworks. Consider the logistical infrastructure requirements. The Merlin engine demanded different maintenance protocols than radial-powered P-47 seconds liquid coolant systems, requiring glycol inventory management spark plug specifications, differing from existing stocks, propeller blade, pitch, mechanisms operating on distinct hydraulic principles. Ground crews trained on Wright Cyclone radials faced retraining curves, averaging 48 hours of technical instruction before achieving maintenance proficiency on Packard Merlins. The 354th flew its first combat escort mission on the 1st of December 1943, target Amiens-Glisy Airfield in northern France. The tactical parameters demonstrated the aircraft's transformative potential: penetration depth of 475 miles, total mission duration of 3. 4 hours and critically 30 minutes of combat operations at maximum continuous power upon reaching target area. Previous Escort fighters arrived at maximum range limits with fuel states permitting perhaps 10 minutes of combat maneuvering. December 13 marked the operational pivot point, the first Mustang Escort to Kiel, Germany, a 540-mile penetration representing 90 miles beyond previous maximum Escort coverage. The bomber formations targeting U-boat construction facilities experienced fighter protection through previously undefended airspace. Luftwaffe intercept patterns calibrated for decades to exploit Escort range limitations encountered American fighters in zones deemed tactically secure. The kill ratio metrics revealed systemic disruption. During December 1943, P-51 units achieved 1.8 enemy aircraft destroyed per Mustang lost in air combat compared to the 8th Air Force's overall fighter ratio of 1.31. By January 1944, as pilot proficiency improved and tactical doctrine evolved, the P-51 ratio climbed to 2.61. But quantitative performance metrics understated the strategic transformation. The presence of long-range escorts fundamentally altered Luftwaffe operational calculus. German fighter controllers could no longer reliably predict undefended zones. Intercept planning required accounting for potential Escort presence throughout bomber penetration depth, forcing earlier commitment of fighter resources, reducing fuel reserves for sustained combat, and eliminating the tactical luxury of timed attacks coordinated with Escort withdrawal. By February 1944, Lieutenant General James Doolittle assumed command of the 8th Air Force and implemented doctrinal revision that weaponized the P-51's range advantage. The traditional Escort mission, close formation support maintaining visual contact with bombers, evolved into area support doctrine. Fighter groups received authorization to range 50 miles ahead of bomber streams, sweep target areas before bomber arrival, and pursue German fighters aggressively rather than maintaining defensive posture. The operational directive issued February 11 was strategically unambiguous. Destroy the enemy air force wherever you find them in the air, on the ground, and in the factories. This represented philosophical inversion of Escort doctrine. Fighters transitioned from reactive protection to offensive hunting, utilizing superior range to control airspace proactively rather than respond to attacks reactively. The P-51's fuel capacity enabled pursuit engagements previously impossible, chasing German fighters to their airfields, loitering over Luftwaffe bases to intercept returning aircraft with depleted fuel states, and conducting barrier combat air patrols along likely intercept vectors. Colonel Donald Blakesley, commanding the 4th Fighter Group, the 1st P-47 unit transitioning to Mustangs, articulated the tactical revolution with characteristic directness. We no longer wait for them to come to us. We find them, engage them, and destroy them before they reach the bombers. The cascading systemic effects manifested across German air defense infrastructure. Luftwaffe units previously able to husband resources and time attacks optimally faced continuous offensive pressure throughout operational depth. Pilot fatigue increased. Maintenance cycles compressed. Fuel consumption accelerated. The invisible wall protecting German airspace had not merely moved, it had evaporated entirely. The 6th of March 1944. The strategic bombing campaign executed its first full-scale daylight assault on Berlin, a target deemed operationally unattainable merely 4 months prior. The mission profile revealed the transformed operational parameters: 730 heavy bombers, escorted by 801 fighters with P-51 groups, maintaining continuous coverage across 1150 miles of total mission distance. For Luftwaffe command structures, the mathematical impossibility had become tactical reality. German fighter controllers at JAG Division headquarters tracked the inbound formations with mounting cognitive dissonance. The radar plots showed bomber streams approaching from multiple vectors, standard American doctrine. The Escort fighters appeared on schedule P 47 seconds over the Channel, P 38 seconds over the Netherlands. But then the plots continued, updating Escort contacts, penetrating past Hanover, past Magdeburg, maintaining formation integrity all the way to the Reich capital. Major Günther Rahl, credited with 275 aerial victories and commanding 3 JG-52 on the Eastern Front before rotating west, encountered P-51 seconds over central Germany in late February. His post-war testimony provides analytical precision to the operational disruption. The technical specifications we received indicated American fighters possessed limited radius of action. Our tactical doctrine depended on this limitation. When Mustangs appeared over Berlin with sufficient fuel reserves for sustained combat, it invalidated our entire defensive architecture. The systemic implications cascaded through Luftwaffe operational planning. Consider the resource allocation calculus. German fighter units traditionally husbanded fuel and ammunition timing intercepts to maximize effectiveness during the bomber's unescorted phases. With continuous escort presence, this optimization strategy collapsed. Units faced binary choices: engage escorts immediately and deplete combat resources before reaching bombers, or penetrate through escort screens, suffering attrition en route to primary targets. Statistical analysis of combat engagement outcomes reveals the strategic transition with quantitative clarity. During January 1944, the 8th Air Force bomber loss rate averaged 3.8% per mission. By March, with comprehensive P-51 coverage, this declined to 1.9%, a 50% reduction. Conversely, Luftwaffe loss rates inverted dramatically from 2.3 German fighters lost per mission in January to 6.7 per mission by March. The March 6 Berlin mission demonstrated the operational mechanics of aerial superiority transfer. German controllers scrambled approximately 460 fighters, JG-1, JG-3, JG-11, JG-26, and elements from night fighter units pressed into daylight service. The intercept pattern followed established doctrine mass formations, assembling at altitude coordinated attacks from multiple vectors designed to saturate bomber defensive fire. But the P-51 groups had implemented the new offensive escort doctrine. The 4th Fighter Group, led by Colonel Don Blakesley, swept 30 miles ahead of bomber formations, encountering German assembly points before intercept coordination completed. The 357th Fighter Group positioned at bomber stream altitude, engaging German formations as they attempted penetration approaches. The 355th Fighter Group flew barrier patrols along egress routes, interdicting damaged German aircraft attempting return to base. The aerial combat over Berlin that day consumed 5 hours of sustained engagement across 4,000 square miles of airspace. American losses: 69 bombers, 11 fighters. German losses: 160 fighters confirmed destroyed, with an additional 90 damaged beyond immediate repair capability. The exchange ratio measured in aircraft destroyed per operational sortie had shifted from near parity to 2-8-1 in favor of Allied forces. Oberleutnant Heinz Noak, flying with JG-11, recorded the psychological dimension in his combat diary. Today we intercepted the Americans over our capital, but we did not control the battle. Their fighters were everywhere above us, beside us, pursuing us to our own airfields. This is what defeat looks like. The technical specifications that enabled this transformation: the P-51's 0.41 pounds per horsepower-hour fuel consumption, its 437-gallon maximum fuel capacity, its 1720 horsepower at 25,000 feet translated into strategic reality. The Luftwaffe no longer defended Germany's skies. It contested them, and increasingly it lost. The P-51's strategic dominance emerged not from singular innovation, but from systemic integration of aerodynamic efficiency, power plant optimization, and fuel management protocols that collectively redefined operational parameters for single-engine fighter aircraft. Consider the fuel system architecture as an integrated technological ecosystem. The internal fuel capacity, 184 gallons, distributed across fuselage tanks positioned fore and aft of the cockpit, represented merely the foundation of range capability. The critical innovation involved external carriage systems, standardized 75-gallon or 108-gallon drop tanks, suspended from underwing pylons via quick-release shackles. These auxiliary tanks fed fuel to the engine via pressure differential systems before internal tanks engaged, allowing pilots to jettison empty external tanks without compromising mission fuel reserves. The operational mathematics became strategically transformative. Maximum fuel load of 419 gallons consumed at cruise settings of 170 gallons per hour at 25,000 feet and 265 miles per hour indicated airspeed yielded theoretical endurance of 2.47 hours. But the Merlin engine's exceptional specific fuel consumption, 0.41 pounds per brake horsepower per hour at optimal cruise configuration, extended practical endurance significantly beyond theoretical calculations based on fuel volume alone. Tactical mission profiles routinely exceeded 6 hours total duration. A representative Berlin Escort mission from February 1944 documented the operational sequence takeoff from Debden at 7 hours climb to 25,000 feet over the North Sea, consuming 45 gallons cruise to Dutch coast at economical settings, rendezvous with bomber formations at 1,035 hours over Zuida. Escort penetration across 380 miles of hostile airspace, 37 minutes of combat, maneuvering over target area at maximum. Continuous power consuming Vienna's Schimtas Deschimt gallons. Egress escort across northern Germany, landfall over English coast at 1,512 hours. Pattern entry and landing at 1,523 hours. Total mission duration 6 hours, 36 minutes. Fuel remaining 23 gallons, sufficient for 14 minutes of flight time. These extreme endurance profiles imposed physiological demands unprecedented in fighter operations. Pilots sat in cramped cockpits, measuring 39 inches wide for durations exceeding contemporary bomber missions, managing oxygen systems at altitudes where cabin pressure equaled 8,000 foot density altitude, and maintaining tactical vigilance across hundreds of miles of potentially hostile airspace. The physical toll manifested in post-mission medical evaluations: dehydration, muscle fatigue from sustained anti-G strain, and cognitive exhaustion from extended high-altitude operations. The weapon system integration reflected contemporary fire control methodology approaching theoretical optimization. 6. Browning M2. 50 caliber machine guns, 3 per wing, synchronized to fire through propeller arc, carried 1880 rounds of ammunition, providing approximately 34 seconds of sustained fire. The K-14 lead computing gun sight, introduced in late 1944 variants, incorporated gyroscopic principles to calculate bullet trajectory relative to target angular velocity, effectively automating deflection shooting, calculations that previously required pilot cognitive processing. Cockpit visibility represented perhaps the most underappreciated tactical advantage. The Malcolm Hood modification standard on P-51D variants provided 360-degree visual coverage through bubble canopy design, eliminating structural blind spots inherent to earlier Razorback configurations. Combat engagement outcomes correlated measurably with visibility parameters. Pilots reported tracking hostile aircraft an average of 2.7 seconds earlier in bubble canopy variants compared to Razorback configurations, sufficient temporal advantage to establish firing solutions before enemy evasive maneuvers initiated. For Luftwaffe pilots, the P-51 represented technological inevitability manifested in aluminum and hydraulics. It appeared without warning possessed fuel reserves permitting sustained combat when German fighters approached emergency reserve states and maintained performance advantages across all altitude regimes relevant to bomber escort operations. Hauptmann Heinz Baer, credited with 220 victories, articulated the operational reality with clinical precision. The Mustang possessed no exploitable weakness. Superior speed, superior range, superior high-altitude performance, adequate armament, excellent visibility. You could defeat individual Mustangs through tactical surprise or numerical advantage, but you could not defeat the systemic presence of Mustangs throughout our operational airspace. The collapse of German air superiority represents a case study in cascading systemic failure, where technological asymmetry, industrial attrition, and logistical degradation converge to produce operational disintegration across multiple interdependent domains. By April 1944, the Luftwaffe confronted a resource allocation crisis of mathematical inevitability. German aviation fuel production, dependent on synthetic hydrogenation plants, concentrated at 12 primary facilities, faced sustained strategic bombing. The Leuna plant near Merseburg, producing 35% of Germany's total aviation gasoline, absorbed repeated attacks throughout spring, 1,944. Monthly aviation fuel production declined from 175,000 metric tons in March to 52,000 metric tons by June, a 70% reduction across 90 days. This fuel scarcity propagated through pilot training infrastructure with exponential consequences. Luftwaffe fighter training protocols already compressed from the peacetime standard of 240 flight hours to approximately 160 hours by 1943, degraded further to 110 hours by mid-1944. Comparative analysis reveals the strategic asymmetry. American fighter pilots arriving in European theater averaged 325 hours total flight time, including 5 hours in type-specific aircraft. The experience differential manifested in combat effectiveness metrics. Veteran Luftwaffe aces maintained kill ratios exceeding 3:1, while newly trained replacements achieved ratios below 0.61, indicating net negative combat value. The industrial production dynamics exposed fundamental constraints in German war economy architecture. Peak Luftwaffe single-engine fighter production occurred in September 1944 at 3,375 aircraft, a quantitative achievement masking qualitative degradation. Component quality control failures increased by 40% compared to 1,943 standards. Engine mean time between failures declined from 87 hours to 61 hours. Critical shortages in molybdenum, tungsten, and nickel forced substitution of inferior alloys in engine components, reducing operational reliability systematically. Consider the operational sustainability mathematics. In January 1944, the Luftwaffe possessed approximately 1,650 operational single-engine fighters distributed across Western Front fighter units. Monthly attrition averaged 850 aircraft, combining combat losses, operational accidents, and mechanical failures. Replacement production delivered 1,140 aircraft monthly, yielding apparent net positive replacement capacity of 290 aircraft per month. But this superficial arithmetic concealed cascading degradation in pilot availability. January 1944, 2395 operational fighter pilots. Monthly attrition, 580 pilots killed, missing, or permanently incapacitated. Replacement training output, 420 pilots monthly. Net monthly deficit, 160 experienced pilots replaced by inadequately trained substitutes. The cumulative effect produced qualitative erosion exceeding quantitative metrics. The Jagdwaffe maintained numerical strength while hemorrhaging operational effectiveness. The strategic bombing campaigns, systematic targeting of synthetic fuel production facilities, ball-bearing manufacturing centers, and transportation networks created interconnected failure cascades. Fuel shortages, constrained training producing inexperienced pilots. Inexperienced pilots suffered higher combat attrition, accelerating pilot depletion. Pilot depletion reduced effective air defense, enabling deeper bomber penetration. Deeper penetration facilitated more effective targeting of industrial infrastructure, intensifying resource constraints recursively. By the 6th of June 1944 D-Day, the operational manifestation of systemic collapse became tactically visible. The Luftwaffe managed approximately 319 sorties over Normandy invasion beaches across 24 hours, compared to Allied Air Force's 1,4,6,7,4 sorties, a 4,6,1 numerical disadvantage. More significantly, the Luftwaffe's sorties achieved negligible operational impact. 0 Allied capital ships damaged, minimal disruption to landing operations, and disproportionate German losses of 62 aircraft. The July 1944 fighter production statistics reveal the paradox of industrial output, divorced from operational capability. Germany produced 3,156 single-engine fighters, while possessing fuel reserves sufficient for approximately 1,200 aircraft operating at training-level sortie rates. Aircraft accumulated at airfields, operationally useless industrial artifacts divorced from strategic utility. General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, commanding the Luftwaffe fighter forces, articulated the systemic reality in his August 1944 assessment to Göring. We possess aircraft without fuel, pilots without training, and bases within range of enemy fighters. The arithmetic of air warfare has fundamentally inverted. The P-51's presence represented not merely tactical advantage, but the visible manifestation of industrial technological superiority, translated into operational dominance inevitability, given aerodynamic form. The P-51 Mustang transcended its role as tactical instrument to become a case study in how technological convergence reshapes strategic paradigms. Its operational deployment between December 1943 and May 1945 represented not merely fighter escort provision, but the systematic dismantling of adversary air combat capability through sustained industrial technological superiority. The human arithmetic remains unambiguous and morally unresolvable. The 8th Air Force suffered 26000 fatalities. Young men whose average age was 23, whose training consumed 18 months and $100, $000 per individual in 1944 dollars, whose loss represented not only personal tragedy, but systematic erosion of irreplaceable human capital. Each B-17 crew that failed to return eliminated 10 years of cumulative technical training, operational experience, and institutional knowledge. The Luftwaffe's personnel losses exceeded 35000. Fighter pilots killed between 1,943 and 1,945, a figure representing not only individual mortality, but the complete depletion of Germany's aerial warfare institutional memory. By war's end, Jagdgeschwader units operated with average pilot experience below 40 flight hours, compared to 240-hour peacetime standards and Allied averages exceeding 300 hours. The civilian dimension compounds moral complexity exponentially. Strategic bombing campaigns facilitated by long-range escort capability resulted in approximately 4,100,000 German civilian casualties. Individuals whose relationship to military-industrial infrastructure ranged from direct participation to geographic proximity. The Strategic Bombing Survey conducted post-war revealed that approximately 35% of targeted facilities suffered damage sufficient to impair production capacity by 50% or greater, suggesting that 65% bombing effort generated civilian casualty consequences disproportionate to industrial degradation achieved. Yet, the systemic transformation proved strategically decisive through mechanisms extending beyond immediate combat outcomes. The P-51's operational deployment forced resource allocation cascades throughout German war economy, aviation fuel diverted from ground forces, industrial capacity redirected to fighter production at expense of tank and artillery manufacturing and transportation networks, prioritizing air defense logistics over frontline supply sustainment. The doctrinal implications resonated through subsequent decades of air power theory. The P-51 demonstrated that technological superiority in specific performance parameters range fuel efficiency, high-altitude capability, could generate operational advantages exceeding raw numerical or firepower metrics. This insight influenced jet fighter design philosophy, strategic air defense architecture, and expeditionary warfare doctrine through the Cold War era and beyond. The Mustang represented industrial modernity's capacity to translate engineering precision into strategic dominance, the systematic application of aerodynamic theory, metallurgical science, and production methodology to generate military capability. It embodied both human ingenuity's finest expression and warfare's fundamental tragedy, that technological brilliance serves destruction, that precision engineering enables mass casualties, that innovation's highest achievements manifest through lethal application. The silver-winged fighters that escorted bombers to Berlin carried more than fuel and ammunition, they carried the paradox of progress itself. The German pilots were stunned when the P-51 escorts never turned back, but this reaction transcended tactical surprise to reveal a deeper epistemological shift in warfare's fundamental nature. The invisible boundaries that once protected German airspace dissolved not through strategic brilliance or operational audacity, but through the methodical application of aerodynamic science to strategic problems. The Mustang represented technological determinism manifested in aluminum and hydraulic systems, a machine that transformed abstract engineering principles into geopolitical consequences. Its laminar-flow wing, its Merlin power plant integration, its fuel system architecture. These were not merely technical specifications, but the vocabulary through which industrial civilizations articulate strategic intent. Range became weapon. Endurance became doctrine. Fuel efficiency became the calculus of air supremacy. The silver fighters that escorted bomber formations across 1,000 miles of hostile airspace carried more than ordnance. They carried the inexorable mathematics of industrial warfare, where production capacity, resource allocation, and technological optimization determined outcomes more decisively than individual valor or tactical genius. In the frozen skies above Berlin, February 1944, the lesson crystallized into operational reality. Victory accrues to those systems capable of projecting sustained capability across operational depth previously deemed impossible. The P-51 did not merely extend range. It redefined the geographic and temporal boundaries within which air power could operate decisively. War transforms men through violence and sacrifice, but technology transforms war itself, reshaping the possible, rewriting the mathematics of survival, and rendering yesterday's certainties into obsolete assumptions scattered across the stratosphere, like contrails dissolving into winter air. The escorts never turned back, and the sky would never be the same.